The woman lying beside the service road behind the abandoned textile mill was bleeding out, and in her hand was an uncapped syringe, pointed straight at him. Emmett Kavanagh had run everything that moved through the South Docks of Providence for 6 years. He had seen men beg. He had seen men lie. He had seen men twice his size go unsteady at the sound of his name. But he had never pulled over at 3:11 in the morning and found a nurse propped against the wheel of an overturned pickup, blue scrubs gone dark from the hip down, her voice level, her hand steady, and not a trace of fear in her eyes for him. "Stay back," she said. "I know who you are, and you don't want to be here when they come back." He didn't stay back. He crouched down exactly 1 arm's length away, took out his phone, and asked the question he always asked when someone was dying in front of him. "Who do I call for you?" She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he thought she had lost consciousness. "There's nobody," she said. Emmett Kavanagh had spent his whole life in a world where everybody had someone to call. A creditor, a lawyer, a brother, an enemy. Everybody had a name in their phone. What he didn't know was that the answer she had just given him would undo everything he believed about the last 3 years of his life, and that the woman dying in front of him had not ended up on that road by accident. She had been on her way to find him. If this opening has you wanting to know what happens next, leave a like and hit subscribe. That's how stories like this one reach more people. If you've ever met someone who looked like nobody special and turned out to be stronger than everyone in the room, share this video with them. And in the comments, tell me what city you're listening from. I'd like to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. His finger had already touched 3 numbers on the screen when she spoke. Not Ash Grove. Her voice wasn't louder or more urgent. It was simply clear, in the way someone might read an instruction written on a patient's chart. Emmett stopped. Ash Grove Memorial was 4 minutes away by car. Anyone losing blood on this stretch of road would be taken there by ambulance, and everyone in this city knew it. "Why?" he asked. She didn't answer. She only looked at him, and in the backwash of the headlights, he saw that she wasn't deciding whether she should tell him. She was deciding whether he was capable of understanding. The silence lasted about 4 seconds, and it changed his mind. In 6 years of running the South Harbor, Emmett Kavanagh had learned that people who lied talked too much, while people who knew something dangerous stayed quiet. He shut off the screen, slipped the phone into the inside pocket of his coat, and pulled out another one. He pressed a single number. "Service road behind the Corliss textile mill," he said. "Bring the blue bag. 7 minutes." Then he hung up and turned back to her. "How much longer can you stay conscious?" "Not long," she said. "If you want to ask me anything, ask now." "I'm not asking. I'm keeping you breathing." He took off his outer coat and folded it. She watched him do it, then shook her head once, very slightly, as though even that movement had to be rationed. "Not there," she said. "Lower, 4 finger widths below the last rib, angled toward the back. Press down, then inward at about 30 degrees. Don't press straight in." He did as she said. She drew a short breath through her teeth and made no sound. "Hold it there," she said. "Don't lift your hand to check. Every time you lift it, you ruin whatever has just started clotting." "I know. You don't. Everyone lifts their hand to check." She closed her eyes for about 2 seconds, then opened them again. "You didn't." The second car arrived at 3:22 in the morning, exactly 7 minutes after he'd said it would. The man who stepped out was 58 years old, with short, cropped silver hair. He moved slowly, but without the slightest hesitation, carrying a worn blue canvas bag with frayed edges. Sully Rourke had spent 12 years as a Navy corpsman, and another 22 working for the Kavanagh family, and during that time he had patched up every kind of person in every kind of situation the police were never meant to hear about. He knelt beside her, opened the bag, and began working without asking a single question. Then she started talking to him. "Entry wound in the left flank, below the last rib. I can't identify an exit wound. There's a good chance the bullet is still inside. The second wound grazed the right shoulder. Shallow. Doesn't need to be treated first. My pulse was around 120 earlier. It's probably higher now. I managed to keep pressure on it myself for about 20 minutes before he got here." Sully's hand stopped for exactly half a second. He looked up. "You kept track of the time?" "I counted breaths," she said. 4 breaths at a time. 15 sets makes a minute. I counted 810. He didn't ask anything else. He took out a pressure dressing, peeled away the wrapper, and she kept speaking, giving him each step with exact precision. The angle, the amount of pressure, how long to hold it, when he could shift his hand. He followed every word. In 22 years, he had never allowed anyone to tell him how to do this job. And in 22 years, he had never met anyone who told him how to do it this accurately. When the bandaging was finished, Sully looked up at Emmett. He didn't say anything. He only looked at him, and Emmett understood that look because he had known this man since he was 11 years old. It meant, "Do you know who she is?" Emmett gave the slightest shake of his head. They got her into the car. She managed to stand on her own halfway before she had to let Sully support her the rest of the way, and she allowed him to help without showing irritation and without thanking him, as though it were simply another step in a procedure. Emmett got into the back seat beside her. Sully drove. The car pulled away from the service road, heading in the opposite direction from the hospital, and for about a minute, no one said anything. Then Emmett spoke. "You know who I am." "Yes." People who know who I am usually have one of two reactions. They run, or they start talking too much. He turned to look at her. "You didn't do either." She opened her eyes. Streetlights passed over her face in bands, one after another, and in that moment he saw that she was younger than he had thought out there, perhaps only 27 or 28, with an entirely ordinary face, the kind of face people saw every day in hospital corridors and never remembered. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because you aren't the person trying to kill me." The car headed east, leaving the industrial district behind, and Emmett let her answer remain suspended in the air for a while. Sully glanced up at the rearview mirror once, then looked away. She was getting worse. He could see it in the rhythm of her breathing, in the way her shoulders sank a little farther with every turn, in the extra half-second it took her to blink. "What's your name?" he asked. "That doesn't matter right now." "It matters to me." "No." She drew in a breath, held it, then let it out slowly. "If I pass out before I finish, then what I need to tell you isn't my name." He didn't understand what that meant. He would, but it would take another 2 hours. "Then tell me," he said, and she did. But she didn't talk about the wound, or the 2 men on the service road, or who had shot her. She began in an entirely different voice, slower now, clearer, separating each word as though she were reading aloud from a file she had read so many times, she no longer needed to look at it. "Bed 12, she said. 4th floor, Ashgrove Memorial, West Inpatient Wing, right-hand corridor from the elevators." Emmett didn't move. "November, 3 years ago." She continued. "Female patient, 61 years old, admitted on the 19th. Intravenous treatment ordered beginning on the 21st. In the front seat, Sully slowed down slightly. Not much, just enough for Emmett to realize that he was listening too. "You sat in the chair on the left," she said. "Not the one by the window. The plastic chair farther inside, near the foot of the bed. You sat there for 40 hours. You didn't eat anything for the first 2 days. The afternoon shift nurse brought you a cup of soup, and you left it untouched on the windowsill until it went cold, then poured it into the toilet because you didn't want anyone to see that you hadn't drunk it." Emmett could hear the blood rushing in his ears. "On the second night, you called someone from the hallway," she said. "You said 3 sentences. You said it wasn't necessary yet. Then you went back inside." "Who are you?" he said. His voice didn't rise. It simply went dry. She didn't answer that question. She was following a sequence, and she didn't leave it because she knew how much time she had left, and she had already worked out the order of importance. "By the morning of the 3rd day, she couldn't speak anymore," she said, "and you started holding her hand." Emmett remembered. He remembered it perfectly, and in 3 years he had never told that detail to anyone. Not even Sully. "You were holding it the wrong way," she said. "You wrapped your whole hand around hers and squeezed. Everyone does that. But at that stage, peripheral circulation is very poor. The finger joints hurt, and squeezing only caused her more pain, except she couldn't speak to tell you." She stopped, breathed, then continued. She didn't finish the sentence. Her head tipped to one side and came to rest against the car door frame, and her body went slack in the way Sully had seen a few hundred times in his life, and Emmett had seen often enough to know exactly what it was. "Sully, I see it." He pulled over, got out, opened the rear door, and worked for 40 seconds with 2 fingers pressed beneath the angle of her jaw. "Still has a pulse, fast and weak. Her blood pressure is dropping." He laid her flat across the back seat and raised her legs. "Keep going. Mrs. Vandermeer has the lights on." Emmett held her head so it wouldn't strike the car door for the remaining 14 minutes of the drive, and didn't say a single word. The only thing he thought about, over and over again, was the sentence she hadn't finished. "So I did what?" Showed him how to hold her hand. He remembered that someone had shown him. He remembered that one morning, a young nurse had come into the room and said nothing about life or death, offered no words of comfort, simply took hold of his wrist and repositioned his hand beneath his mother's, palm facing upward, so that she could rest her hand on top of his, instead of being trapped inside his grip. She had said only one sentence before leaving the room. He couldn't remember what it was. He had tried to remember it for 3 years, and he couldn't remember her face at all. That was what made him sit motionless in the darkness of the back seat, with one hand beneath the neck of a woman who was losing blood. For 3 years, he had paid people to investigate that stretch of time, had read the medical records, had questioned doctors, had done everything a man with money and nothing left to lose would do. It had never once occurred to him to ask the nurses. He didn't know who this woman was. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she had been shot, who had shot her, or what she had been doing on a service road at 3 o'clock in the morning. He knew only one thing, and that was enough to keep him from leaving the car until dawn. She had been in that room. During the final 40 hours of his mother's life, she had been there. Ruth Vandermeer's clinic occupied the ground floor of a low row of buildings on Wickenden Street, its glass door covered with frosted film, the sign removed 2 years earlier when she retired. The lights in the small operating room at the back were already on when the car arrived at 3:51 in the morning. She was 64 years old, tall, with hands that didn't tremble, and she didn't ask a single question about why there was a woman with a gunshot wound in Emmett Kavanaugh's car. She only looked at Sully and asked who had applied the dressing, and when Sully told her the woman had instructed him herself, Ruth paused for half a second before telling them to bring her inside. Emmett stood in the hallway for 1 hour and 40 minutes. He didn't sit. He leaned against the wall opposite the door and stared down at his 2 hands, and at some point during that stretch of time, he realized he had turned his palms upward without ever intending to do it. Ruth came out at 5:31. She removed her gloves, tossed them into the bin, and spoke to him in the manner of someone who had spent 40 years telling truths to people who didn't want to hear them. The bullet was still inside. I removed it. It entered below the last rib, traveled along the rib margin, and stopped in the deep muscle layer. The 11th rib is cracked. No punctured lung, no bowel injury. She was lucky in the kind of way that makes me dislike using the word lucky. She took a towel and wiped her hands. The shoulder wound isn't significant. I put in 3 stitches. Is she going to be all right? She's going to live. Those are 2 different things. Ruth looked at him. Emmett, I need you to understand something. She lost more blood than a person should be able to lose, and remain conscious. In that condition, she should have passed out on the road before you ever reached her. She stayed awake for nearly an hour, and she was speaking in complete sentences. So the body doesn't do that because it's strong. Ruth folded the towel and set it on the table. She stayed conscious because there was something she hadn't finished. I've seen this 3 times in my life. And all 3 times it was someone who had one thing they needed to tell another person before they could allow themselves to stop. Sully returned at 5:40. After leaving her with Ruth, he had gone back to the service road alone, with his lights off, and spent 20 minutes there. The pickup truck lay tilted into the ditch, the driver's door open, the passenger side window shattered. He didn't touch anything inside the cab. He only searched. He placed 3 things on the table: an expired employee identification card from a private urgent care clinic on Broad Street. The photograph faded. The name, Faye Corbin. A thick, black, hardbound notebook, its page edges curled from being turned too many times, the lower corner soaked with blood, and a white envelope, unsealed, resting on the passenger seat, clean and untouched by anything else. Where was this? Emmett asked. On the seat beside her, placed neatly. It didn't fall out of a bag. Sully sat down. Open it. Inside the envelope was a sheet of paper folded in half. The handwriting was small and even, written in blue ballpoint ink, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who wrote often and wrote quickly, but never allowed herself to become careless. There were 2 lines on it. The first was an address. Not his home address, not his office. It was Gate 2 of the Kavanaugh warehouse at Kestrel Point, the gate known only to his own people and 4 freight contractors, the gate his vehicles passed through every day. The second line contained only 1 sentence. If I don't make it there, tell him about bed 12. Emmett read it 3 times. Then he set the paper down on the table and didn't touch it again. Sully was the first to speak. She wasn't passing through there. No, she was coming to you. Emmett looked at the expired identification card, at the name of the clinic on Broad Street, and did the calculation in his head. It was simple, and it sent a cold sensation down his spine in a way very few things had managed to do over the past 6 years. The night shift at a private urgent care clinic ended at 3 o'clock in the morning. From Broad Street to Kestrel Point, taking the main roads required 18 minutes and past 4 traffic cameras. Taking the service road behind the Corliss textile mill required 26 minutes and past none. She had chosen the longer road. She hadn't intended to meet him. People didn't meet Emmett Kavanaugh by knocking on a door. He had no public phone number, no office anyone could walk into, No name on any paperwork anywhere in Providence. She knew that. So she had done the only thing a person with nothing in her hands could do. She had written a note, placed it in an envelope, and intended to leave it at Gate 2 at 3 o'clock in the morning when no one was watching, with a single sentence calculated to make him open it instead of throwing it away, and she had calculated correctly. Emmett sat down in the chair in the hallway of Ruth Vandermeer's clinic, facing a closed door, with an unsealed envelope on the table. For 3 years, he had believed he was the most dangerous man in this city, that everything happening at the South Harbor began with a decision made by him. It turned out he was only the last resort in a night shift nurse's plan. She woke at 5:40. Ruth Vandermeer had warned them that people usually needed a little time to orient themselves after regaining consciousness, that no one should ask her anything during the first 10 minutes. Faye Corbin didn't need 10 minutes. She opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds, looked at the IV line in her left arm, looked toward the door, then looked at Emmett sitting in a chair about 1 meter from the bed. "You read the envelope," she said. "I did." "Good. That saves time." She tried to sit up. Ruth, standing at the foot of the bed, said no once, and Faye stopped. She didn't argue. She only adjusted her position so she could look directly into his face. He realized she was doing the same thing she had been doing since the service road. She was arranging things in order of importance. "My name is Faye Corbin," she said. "I'm a nurse. Since June, 3 years ago, I've worked the night shift at the urgent care clinic on Broad Street. Before that, I worked on the 4th floor inpatient unit at Ashgrove Memorial for 2 years and 7 months. I know, Sully found your identification card. I'm not telling you so you know who I am. I'm telling you so you understand where I was standing when I saw what I'm about to tell you." Emp didn't answer. He had learned tonight that when this woman paused, it wasn't because she was hesitating. "Your mother," Faye said, "didn't die because her disease progressed." The heart monitor continued its steady beeping in the room. Ruth Vandermeer didn't move. Neither did Sully, standing in the doorway. She was admitted on November 19th. Her treatment orders began on November 21st. On paper, her regimen was correct. The dosage was correct. The timing was correct. The IV route was correct. Everything in the medical record matched. She drew in a slow breath. What was inside the infusion bag didn't. "What do you mean?" "I mean the medication in your mother's infusion bag contained about 1/3 of the active drug listed on the label. The rest was diluting solution." Emmett didn't move. He heard himself ask the question, and his own voice sounded unfamiliar to him. "Are you sure? I have the lot number. I have the compounding date. I have the name of the person who approved its release from inventory." She looked directly at him. "And I have 71 other people." For 3 seconds, no one said anything. 71, he said. 71 patients. Over 3 years. At 4 hospitals. All of them belonged to the Ashgrove Health Partners system. All of them received medication from the same central compounding operation. She paused to catch her breath, then continued. Ashgrove doesn't prepare the drugs separately at each hospital. They consolidate everything at one facility, compound the medication there, then distribute it to all 4 locations. That's how they save money. It's also why one place is enough. Who takes the rest? I don't know who takes it. I know it leaves inventory. She closed her eyes for a beat, then opened them again. High-dose cancer drugs and strong controlled pain medications. On the gray market, 1 vial can cost the equivalent of a month of my salary. If you dilute 2/3 of it and sell the difference, and you do that for 3 years across 4 hospitals, the amount you end up with isn't pocket money. Emmett stood. He took 3 steps toward the window and stopped there with his back to the room. "Why didn't anyone notice?" he asked. "Because the patients died within the expected prognosis." He turned around. "That's the cleverest part," Faye said. "These were all seriously ill patients. Their doctors had already told their families from the beginning that maybe they had 6 months, maybe 8. When they died in the 5th month, no one was surprised. The families cried, thanked the doctors, and went home. No one asked for an autopsy. No one demanded that an infusion bag be tested after someone died from an illness everyone in the family already knew would eventually kill them." Her next sentence came in a voice flatter than anything she had said before. "They don't kill healthy people. They only shorten the time of people who are already running out of it. And everyone calls it the disease." Ruth Vandermeer, standing at the foot of the bed, placed one hand on the bed rail and said nothing. 3 years, Emmett said. "You've known about this for 3 years." "Yes. And you didn't tell anyone." "I did." He looked at her. "I told someone once," Faye said. "At the time I had 4 names and a feeling. I took it to Ashgrove's quality management office. I explained everything for 20 minutes. They listened very politely, thanked me, and said they would look into it." She paused. 6 days later, My contract was terminated for violating medication inventory procedure. It wasn't a disciplinary firing, just a contract termination. I kept my nursing license, but that line stayed in my employment record, and every major hospital in this state could see it when they checked my file. So you went to work at a private clinic. So I took the night shift at the only place willing to hire me. She looked at him. They didn't destroy me, Mr. Kavanaugh. They only made me invisible. And for the next 3 years, I used exactly that. How? No one notices a night shift nurse at a private urgent care clinic. She continued, slowly and clearly. When Ashgrove patients get worse at 2 o'clock in the morning, they don't always go to a major hospital. They go to the closest place. They bring their medication bags, their discharge papers, even empty vials. And I'm the one sitting at intake. Emmett understood. He understood all of it in a single instant. And it made him sit down. You asked why I waited 3 years, Faye said. Because I spoke up once before I had enough, and I lost everything in 6 days. This time I needed enough that no one could dismiss it. Enough that they couldn't say I imagined it. Couldn't say I was getting revenge. Couldn't say I was some bitter little nurse with a grudge. She looked at him, and for the first time that night, there was something beneath the surface of her voice. I have 71 names. Your mother was number 19. Emmett rose from the chair and walked to the door. He didn't say anything. He only made a 2-finger gesture, and Sully followed him into the hallway. And for the next 30 seconds, Emmett Kavanaugh spoke in the voice everyone who worked for him recognized as the voice of something already decided. The name of the person who approved the release from inventory. She has it. Get that name. Find the address. Find the person who runs the compounding operation too. And the person who signed the distribution contract. How long? Before noon. Sully didn't ask what for. He hadn't asked that question in 30 years. He only nodded once and reached for his coat. And that was when Faye Corbin's voice came from inside the room. Not loud, but clear enough for both men standing in the hallway to hear. If you do that, your mother will still have died of cancer. Emmett turned around. She had pushed herself upright against the headboard, one hand holding the dressing at her side, her face bloodless from the effort. Lie down, Ruth said. 1 minute. Faye didn't take her eyes off Emmett. Listen to me for 1 minute, then I'll lie down. He stood in the doorway and didn't step inside. I know what you're calculating, she said. You have names, you have people, you have 6 years at the South Harbor. You can finish this before dark, and no one will ever trace it back to you. I don't doubt that. Then you should lie down and let me do it. And then what? He didn't answer. I'm asking you seriously, Faye said. After you're finished. Tomorrow, when someone opens Maeve Kavanaugh's medical record, what will still be written on the line marked cause of death? Emmett said nothing. Cancer, she said. It will still say cancer. It will stay that way forever. In every copy. In every state archive in Rhode Island. She will still be a 61-year-old patient who died because her disease progressed. No one will ever know she should have had another 4 months, maybe 6. She stopped to breathe. No one interrupted her. My sister's name was Annie, she said. She died when she was 20. Her record says cancer too. So do the records of the other 71 people. 71 families are moving through year after year believing their loved ones were treated properly and still didn't survive. That's what they believe. That's what they'll carry with them until they die. She looked at him. If you kill those people tonight, not one line in any of those 71 records changes. You'll feel better for about 2 weeks. Then you'll realize you just burned the only thing that could ever correct them. Her voice remained flat. Do you want revenge, or do you want the truth? You only get to choose one. In the hallway, Sully set his coat back down on the chair. Emmett stood motionless for a long time. Then he stepped into the room, pulled the chair closer to the bed, and sat down. How long have you had all 71 names? He asked. All 71, since April. Then you've had 4 months. He looked at her. Why tonight? Why 3 o'clock this morning, instead of any night during the past 4 months? Faye went silent. It was the first time that night she had been silent for a different reason. Because there was someone else, she said. Ruth Vandermeer looked up. I wasn't planning to come to you, Faye said. You weren't part of my plan. You were the last resort. And I only use the last resort when everything before it has failed. She drew a breath. 19 days ago, I sent the entire file to a woman named Marguerite Dowd, 59 years old, an inspector with the Rhode Island Department of Health, 4 months from retirement. You trusted her. She was the only person I trusted. 3 years ago, when my contract was terminated, she was the only person in this entire profession who called to ask whether I was all right. She couldn't help me then, but she called. Faye looked down at her hands. I sent her a complete copy. Lot numbers, compounding dates, the list, everything. She answered 2 days later. She said she needed 3 weeks to cross-check it against pharmaceutical regulator recall data, and then she would open a formal inspection file. Then what? Faye paused long enough for Emmett to know the answer before she said it. 7 days ago, they found her at home. The conclusion was a heart attack. Sully, standing in the doorway, didn't move. She would have turned 60 next month, Faye said. She had 3 grandchildren. She had already booked tickets to Florida for December. You don't think it was a heart attack? I don't think anything. I don't have evidence, and I don't draw conclusions without evidence. She lifted her eyes. But 4 days ago, her daughter called me. She was clearing out the house and found my name in her mother's notes. She called to ask who I was. Faye continued, more slowly now. During the conversation, she mentioned something. Her mother's computer had been turned on that night. She assumed her mother had been working late. But the access history showed that a folder was copied onto an external drive at 1:14 in the morning. The only sound left in the room was the steady beeping of the monitor. What was the folder called? Emmett asked. My name, Faye said. She let that sentence sit there for a moment. They've had my name for 4 days, Mr. Kavanaugh. They know where I work, what time my shift ends, what route I take home. They didn't need to follow me. They only needed to wait for me to pass through a stretch of road without cameras. She lowered herself back down slowly and looked up at the ceiling. Tonight I took the service road because I didn't want anyone to see me going to your warehouse gate. I chose the exact road where they were waiting. At 7:15 in the morning, Faye told him about the locker. The original isn't on my computer, and it isn't at my house. It's on a hard drive stored in locker number 47. In the luggage storage area at Kennedy Plaza bus terminal. I rent it quarterly and pay cash. My name isn't anywhere on it. Who knows the locker number? She looked at him, and he saw her understand it at the same moment he did. Marguerite, she said. I wrote the locker number in the file I sent her, so if something happened to me, she could still get the original. Sully left at 7:20. He went alone, wearing an old coat and a wool cap, and stood in line to buy a ticket to Fall River like an old man going to visit his children or grandchildren. Then he walked past the row of storage lockers and opened locker number 47 with the key Faye had given him. He returned at 8:13. He placed a small black hard drive on the table. Still there, he said. No one took it. Faye looked at the hard drive and showed no relief at all. And that was the first sign Emmett had that this wasn't over. They didn't take it, she said. That's the problem. Ruth Vandermeer was the one with the computer, and she was the one who knew someone from the medical school's technology department who had retired the same year she did, and by 10:40 in the morning, the two of them had been sitting in the clinic's front room for 2 hours, with the hard drive connected to a computer that wasn't connected to any network. Ruth came into the room at 12:52 in the afternoon. She didn't waste words. She pulled over a chair, sat down, and placed a printed sheet of paper on the blanket. The hard drive was accessed, she said, at 1:40 in the morning on the 7th, an hour and a half before you were shot. Faye didn't ask how. She knew how. The locker number had been in the file, and the storage area's spare key was kept at the management desk, and a person with enough connections in this city didn't need to break into a locker. They didn't take it, Ruth said. They overwrote it. How much? Not all of it. That's the part I don't understand. Ruth pushed the sheet toward her. They ran an overwrite program across the data sectors, but they stopped halfway. Maybe they ran out of time. Maybe someone walked past. My friend says the hard drive was disconnected when the process had only reached about 40%. What's left? Ruth was silent for half a second. 40, she said. No one in the room spoke. 40 names are still intact, Ruth continued. Lot numbers, compounding dates, photographs of vial labels, discharge papers, complete. The other 31 are gone. Not partially gone, completely gone. My friend says there's no way to recover them. Emmett stood and walked to the window, then turned back again. He had done that 3 times since morning and hadn't realized he was doing it. 40 is still 40, he said. 40 dead people. 40 medical records. How can that not be enough? Faye didn't answer him. She was looking at the printed page lying on the blanket, and she looked at it for so long that Ruth glanced toward Emmett. Miss Corbin, Ruth said. Faye looked up. Is his mother among the 40? She asked. Ruth lowered her eyes to the page, traced a finger down it, then stopped. Yes, she said. Kavanaugh, Maeve, intact. Lot number 2. Emmett showed nothing outwardly, but he sat down. What about Corbin? Faye asked. Ruth continued down the list. She checked it twice, then she folded the paper in half and didn't hand it over again. No, she said. Faye nodded once. Only once. Then she turned her face toward the window and said nothing for about 2 minutes, and no one in the room broke those 2 minutes. When she turned back, Her voice had returned to what it had been before. "You just asked whether 40 is enough," she said to Emmett. "The answer is no." "Why not?" "Because I still have 31 names in my head." He looked at her. "You need to understand how this will go," Faye said. "If we get this case into court, the people sitting on the other side will have the best lawyers money can buy on the East Coast. They won't argue that those 40 records are fake. They can't. Documents are documents. They'll do something else." "What?" "They'll ask me about the other 31. She spoke slowly, one word at a time, as though she were reading through a script she had built in her mind a long time ago. "They'll ask whether I'm sure. They'll ask where I got them. I'll have to answer that, I remember. And they'll question me one by one, in court, in front of the jury. Full names, admission dates, lot numbers." She lifted her eyes to him. "And if I remember one of them wrong, just one, then they won't need to argue anything else. They'll only have to turn to the jury and say that this witness just gave false testimony. Then they'll ask, if she was wrong about one, why should you believe the other 40? She rested a hand lightly over the bandage at her side, almost without noticing she was doing it. 31 families, she said. If I get one name wrong, their lawyers will use it to discredit all 71. Sully was the one who took the call at 1:20 in the afternoon. He listened for about 40 seconds, said thank you, hung up, then stood motionless in the hallway for a moment before going into the room. "Come out here," he said to Emmett. Faye was sitting propped against the headboard with the black notebook open across her lap, a pen in her right hand, and she looked up at the two of them. "Say it here," she said. Sully looked at Emmett. Emmett nodded. "At 9 o'clock this morning, the Providence Police Department issued a warrant," Sully said. "The name on it is Faye Corbin, 27 years old." She didn't move. The tip of her pen remained exactly where it was on the page. "What are the charges?" she asked. 3 counts. Theft of controlled narcotics from her workplace, falsification of medical records, and fleeing the scene of a traffic accident on the service road behind the Corliss textile mill early this morning. "A traffic accident," Emmett said. "According to the report, the pickup overturned because the driver lost control. There's no record of gunfire." Sully paused. "There's one more thing attached. A urine test result, positive for opioids, dated yesterday. Sample collected at the clinic on Broad Street." Faye set the pen down. "I didn't take any test yesterday," she said. "I know. Where I work, we don't have routine drug testing. It's a small private clinic. They can't afford that. I know that too." She nodded slowly. Then she did something Emmett hadn't expected. She picked up the pen, turned to a fresh page in the notebook, and wrote down the 3 charges in the exact order Sully had read them, along with the time the warrant was issued. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Writing it down." She didn't look up. "Later, we'll need to know exactly what they fabricated and exactly when they fabricated it." "Who signed the warrant?" Emmett asked Sully. "Lieutenant Ross Talbot, 47 years old. Narcotics and Pharmaceutical Investigations." Emmett knew the name. Not personally, not socially, but he knew it. In 6 years of running the South Harbor, he had memorized the list of people in the Providence Police Department he was never allowed to touch, and the list of people he could speak to, and Ross Talbot was on neither. Talbot was the kind of man the entire city believed was clean, because he had never taken money from anyone at the harbor. "He isn't one of mine," Emmett said. "No," Sully said, "but now we know whose man he is." Emmett walked to the window. He stood there looking out at Wickenden Street in the afternoon, letting the whole thing rearrange itself in his mind. Then he turned back. "Do you understand what just happened?" he asked Faye. "They changed tactics," she said. "Not just tactics. They changed the objective." He pulled a chair over and sat across from her. "Last night they wanted you dead. This morning they don't." Faye looked up. "Think about it," Emmett said. "If they find the body of a female nurse in a ditch tonight with 2 gunshot wounds, what happens? There's an investigation. There's an autopsy. There are reporters. Someone asks why a nurse was shot on a service road at 3 o'clock in the morning. And once people start asking questions, they find the hard drive. They find the notebook. They find Marguerite Dowd's name." He slowed his voice. "A body has to be explained. That's the one thing these people don't want to have to do. Then what do they want? They want you alive," he said. "And they want you discredited." The room went quiet. "As of 9 o'clock this morning," Emmett continued, "Faye Corbin is no longer a witness. She's a nurse who steals drugs from work, has a positive drug test, falsifies medical records, and runs from an accident scene. Now you can take 71 names or 700 names to anyone you want, and the first question they ask won't be about those 71 names. It'll be about the drug test," Faye said. "Exactly." She looked down at the notebook in her lap. "They don't need you dead anymore," Emmett said. A dead person has to be investigated. They only need you to become a drug-addicted nurse making things up. Ruth Vandermeer, who had been standing in the doorway for some time, spoke. There's something else, she said. If she goes into any hospital from this point forward, the moment they scan her insurance card or enter her name into the system, the warrant will appear within 3 minutes. She can't seek medical care anywhere, not even if the wound becomes infected. Can you handle it? Emmett asked. Yes, for about 10 days. After that, I'll need imaging, and I don't have the equipment. Emmett nodded. Then he realized Faye was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile, just a brief, dry twist at the corner of her mouth, directed at herself rather than anyone else. What? He asked. Nothing. She shook her head. It's just that 3 years ago they did exactly this to me. They wrote one line into my personnel file, and I lost everything in 6 days. She closed the notebook and rested both hands on the cover. This time they wrote it into my criminal record, she said. They only know one trick, Mr. Kavanaugh, but it works very well. They moved her at 9 o'clock that night, after Wickenden Street had gone quiet and Ruth Vandermeer's clinic had been closed for 3 hours. Emmett didn't take her to any place that belonged to him. He didn't own anything in the sense of having his name written on the paperwork, but there were 4 addresses people knew as Kavanaugh properties, and all 4 were useless now. He took her instead to a 2-story house on Bellamy Street in Federal Hill, with a low iron fence and a faded blue front door. The house was still in Maeve Kavanaugh's name. In 3 years, he had never filed the papers to transfer ownership, and he had never explained to anyone why. Sully unlocked the door. Inside, the air was cold and carried the smell of a house that had been shut up for a long time. Ruth went in first, turned on the lights, checked the bedroom on the ground floor, and said it was the best place because Faye wouldn't have to climb stairs. Faye made it as far as the bedroom doorway and stopped. On the low cabinet beside the bed sat a framed photograph. It showed a woman standing in front of a store, one hand on her hip, her hair tied back, laughing at someone outside the frame. Faye stood looking at it for about 4 seconds. Then she sat down, not on the bed. She sat down on the floor right there in the doorway, one hand braced against the wooden boards, and stayed there. Ruth stepped toward her. Emmett raised a hand, and Ruth stopped. Then she went outside, and Sully went with her, and the front door closed very softly. Emmett didn't enter the room. He sat down on the threshold outside it, his back against the frame, about 1.5 meters away from her. He didn't say anything. In 3 years, he had seen many people cry in many kinds of situations, and he had learned that most of them wanted someone to say something. This woman didn't. He knew that with certainty, though he wasn't sure why he knew. She made no sound. Her shoulders didn't shake. If someone hadn't been looking closely, they might have thought she was simply sitting there to rest. But he was looking closely, and he saw that her breathing had fallen into the rhythm he had been hearing since the night before, the pattern of 4 breaths at a time she used to count time, and he understood that she was using that same technique now to keep herself from breaking apart. 10 minutes passed that way. Then she spoke without turning her head. She asked me about you. Emmett didn't move. The second night, Faye said, while she could still speak. She asked me whether the boy outside had eaten anything. He closed his eyes. I lied to her, Faye said. I told her yes, ma'am. She was quiet for a while. That was the only time in 40 hours that I lied to a patient. Emmett didn't answer. He sat on the threshold until she was able to get herself to her feet, about 7 minutes later, and he didn't offer his hand because he knew she wouldn't take it. At 11 o'clock that night, he came back with a stack of blank paper and 2 pens. He set them on the table beside the bed. What's this? She asked. Write everything again. Faye looked at the paper. I already have the notebook. Your notebook is 3 years of notes. It's messy. It was written for yourself, and if someone takes it, there's nothing left. He pulled a chair closer. This is different. Write it from beginning to end. In order. In your own words. Dates. Lot numbers. Names. What happened to Mrs. Dowd? What happened last night? Everything. What for? Emmett looked at her and answered directly, because he had learned over the past 20 hours that speaking around the point with this woman was a waste of time. If something happens to you, the paper will still exist. Faye picked up the pen. She wrote all night. Ruth came in twice to check on her, and both times she found Faye still propped against the headboard with the stack of paper resting on her lap. The pen moving steadily, never stopping so she could think. There were no crossed-out words anywhere. The handwriting on page 11 looked exactly like the handwriting on page 1. The same slant, the same spacing between lines, as though nothing in her body had changed over those 7 hours. At 4:10 in the morning, she finished. She signed her name at the bottom of page 11, wrote the date, wrote the time, then looked up. I need 3 people to sign as witnesses, she said. Full names, date, time. The witnesses have to be people who were present while I was writing. Emmett signed. Sully signed. Ruth Vandermeer signed last, and beside her signature she added her profession and the number of her expired medical license. Then she said that in the morning she would make a copy and keep it somewhere no one in this house knew about. Faye handed the papers to Ruth and lay down, and in less than a minute she was asleep, for the first time since 3 o'clock the previous morning. In the hallway, Sully stood beneath the ceiling light reading the copy. He read slowly through all 11 pages without skipping a single one. Then he folded them and handed them to Emmett. I patched up soldiers for 12 years, he said. I know what someone who's good at enduring pain looks like. I've seen every kind. Emmett waited. She isn't enduring it, Sully said. Enduring is when someone grits their teeth and gets through something so it can be over. He looked toward the closed bedroom door. She's paying a debt to someone. The problem, as Faye said the next morning, wasn't finding someone who believed her. The problem was finding someone with the authority to believe her. Providence police are out, she said. Talbot is sitting there. The State Department of Health is out because the person I had there is dead. Ashgrove is the accused party. That leaves the federal government. Do you have anyone federal? Emmett asked. No, I do. He saw her look up. Not the way you think. I don't know anyone. But I know the name of the person with the most authority in that building, because for the past 6 years her name has been on 3 case files connected to me. Deborah Vance, 55 years old, Deputy United States Attorney for the District of Rhode Island, 19 years in the prosecutor's office, never spoke to the press. Among defense attorneys in Providence, people said Vance didn't negotiate because she didn't need to, and that she had never taken a case to trial unless she was certain of it. The Kavanaugh organization's attorney needed a day and a half to get the appointment. He didn't give his client's name. He only said there was a witness who wanted to present evidence of pharmaceutical fraud across multiple facilities, and that was enough for Vance to give them 15 minutes. Faye went alone with the attorney at 2 o'clock Friday afternoon. Ruth objected fiercely and was ignored. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Deborah Vance listened through the first 4 minutes without interrupting. Then she set down her pen. Miss Corbin, I'm going to be direct, so you don't waste your time. Before you came in this morning, I had your name checked. She slid a printed sheet across the desk. There is an active Providence Police Department warrant for your arrest on 3 charges, issued on the 7th. I know, that warrant was fabricated. Everyone who sits in that chair says that. Yes, Faye said. I imagine they do. Vance studied her for a moment. Then there's the second issue, she said. Your attorney is Mr. Halloran. For the past 11 years, Mr. Halloran has represented interests connected to the South Harbor. I know who he works for. He knows that I know. The attorney said nothing. So this is the position I'm in, Vance said. A witness wanted on narcotics theft charges has been brought into my office by the attorney for an organization that this very office currently has an open file on. Miss Corbin, I don't doubt that you believe what you've just told me, but if I open an investigation based on this testimony, opposing counsel will need about 4 minutes to turn it into a personal revenge operation orchestrated by a criminal organization, and they'll be right about enough of the details that no one will be able to dismiss it. Faye didn't argue. That was what made Vance pause. She simply opened her bag, took out a sheet of paper, and placed it on the desk. Then don't investigate me, she said. Investigate a number. Vance looked at the paper. Written on it was a sequence of characters and a date. What is this? The lot number of a medication batch compounded on September 14th, 3 years ago. It appears in the pharmaceutical regulator's recall records. You can look it up. It's public data. It isn't mine. It didn't come from me, and no one can say I invented it. Faye stood slowly, one hand braced against the edge of the desk. Look up that lot number, then look at the outbound inventory log from Ashgrove's central compounding facility for that same month. Just those 2 things. Compare the dates. And then you can decide for yourself whether I'm making this up. She walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Miss Vance. Vance looked up. Those 71 names aren't my numbers, Faye said. I'm only the person who wrote them down. Then she left. Deborah Vance sat alone in her office for about 2 minutes with the sheet of paper in front of her. Then she called the analysis unit and requested 2 things. The results came back at 7 o'clock that evening. The medication lot bearing that number had been produced on September 14th. On October 2nd, the manufacturer issued a voluntary recall of the entire lot because of a concentration discrepancy discovered during post-production testing. On October 9th, Ashgrove Health Partners' central compounding facility filed a certification stating that all remaining inventory had been destroyed. 142 vials, signed by the pharmacist in charge. The outbound inventory log from that same facility recorded 3 shipments made after October 9th. On October 11th, 38 vials, sent to Ashgrove Memorial. On October 19th, 40 vials, sent to the Warwick facility. On October 27th, 64 vials, sent to the Pawtucket facility. The total was exactly 142. Deborah Vance read the comparison twice. Then she called the analyst and asked whether there was any possibility of a duplicate lot number, a data entry mistake, or a system error. The analyst said yes, theoretically, but 3 outbound shipments adding up exactly to the number reported as destroyed wasn't a data entry mistake. She remained in her office until nearly 11 o'clock that night. What she thought, and what she later repeated only once, was that she had sat there trying to find some way for the data to mean something else. She searched for 4 hours. At 11 o'clock that night, Emmett Kavanaugh's phone vibrated. "Unknown number," he answered. A woman's voice. No name, no greeting. "Bring her to my office." Back entrance. The back entrance of the federal building on Kennedy Avenue opened at 11:40 that night. Deborah Vance herself came to the door, alone, and led them to the 4th floor in the service elevator. 3 folders were already waiting on the desk in her office, and no one else was there. "Before you sit down," Vance said to Faye, "I need to make one thing clear. I didn't ask you here because I believe you. I asked you here because I can't find any way for 142 vials of medication that were officially declared destroyed to have left the facility afterward in 3 separate shipments." "Yes," Faye said. "If someone gives me a reasonable explanation tomorrow, I'll stop, and you won't hear from me again." "I understand." "Then sit down." Faye sat. Emmett remained standing beside the door, and Vance looked at him once before deciding to ignore it. "Now I'm going to tell you what I have," Vance said. She opened the first folder. 3 weeks ago, my office received a routine notification about a corporate transaction in the state. The kind of notice we get every week, and no one reads closely. I had someone read it closely again this afternoon. She slid the paper across the desk. "Ashgrove Health Partners is selling all 4 hospitals." Faye didn't move. "The buyer is an investment fund registered overseas, through 3 layers of intermediary entities. The value of the transaction hasn't been disclosed. According to the filing, the closing date is the 18th. Today is the 7th, Emmett said. Today is the 8th. It's past midnight." Vance didn't look up. "So we have 11 days. No one in the room spoke. "Explain something to me," Faye said. "What does the sale of the hospitals have to do with the records?" "Everything." Vance closed the folder. "Right now, the medical records, outbound inventory logs, destruction certificates, surveillance footage, internal emails, all of it is still in the hands of a legal entity registered in Rhode Island. I get a warrant. I can obtain it. It may take a week, it may take a month, but I can get it. And after the 18th? After the 18th, that entire body of data belongs to a foreign parent company. I can still request it, but I have to go through a mutual legal assistance treaty. On average, that takes 14 months. During those 14 months, the other side has complete authority to decide what to preserve and what to destroy under the laws of the jurisdiction where they're registered." She looked at Faye. "And they won't preserve anything that hurts them. No one does. So the records disappear. They don't disappear. They simply become something I can't reach. In practical terms, it's the same thing." Faye sat still. Then she asked a question neither Emmett nor Vance had expected. "When did this sale begin?" Vance reopened the file. "The first letter of intent sent to the buyer is dated July 22nd. Faye calculated silently. 2 days after I reached 71 names, she said. Vance lifted her head very slowly. "Are you sure? I wrote the date in my notebook. I recorded the final name on July 20th. Faye continued, her voice still flat. "I hadn't sent anything to anyone at that point. Mrs. Dowd didn't receive the file until 19 days ago, which means that on July 22nd, no one outside Ashgrove knew anything. Then it's a coincidence." "Maybe," Faye said, "but maybe they had already planned their exit before they knew someone was counting." Vance wrote a line in her notebook and offered no comment. The next 2 days were spent waiting. Vance needed enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for the central compounding facility, and she worked on it herself with 2 analysts she had personally chosen. Faye remained at the house on Bellamy Street because Ruth Vandermeer had forbidden her from moving around, and she spent most of her time propped against the headboard with the black notebook open across her lap, rewriting from memory the 31 names that had been lost. She rewrote them once every day, compared each version against the previous one, then marked every place where they didn't match. On Tuesday afternoon, Ruth turned on the television in the living room to hear the weather forecast and forgot to turn it off. Faye heard the name from the bedroom. She made it to the doorway and stood there. On the screen was a ceremony. Red ribbon, gold-plated scissors, a row of people in suits, standing shoulder to shoulder. The man in the center was about 52 years old, tall, with silver hair. And he spoke with the warm voice a person only acquired after years of standing in front of crowds. The caption at the bottom of the screen said that the Holloway Oncology Center had just opened at the Warwick facility, built with an investment of $7 million, and that the center had been named for the founder of Ashgrove Health Partners. He spoke for about 40 seconds, about caring for patients in the final stages of illness. He said that no one should have to pass through the last months of life without dignity. The entire room applauded. Faye walked over, picked up the remote, and turned off the television in the middle of his sentence. Ruth looked at her. Faye set the remote down on the table. "He isn't hiding," she said. "He's building monuments right on top of where he buried people." The search warrant was signed by the judge at 7 o'clock Wednesday evening. Vance called Emmett at 7:15 and said exactly 3 sentences. "I have the warrant. 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. No one is to know except the people who already know." Faye asked who already knew. "Miss Vance, her 2 analysts," Emmett said. "On my side, me and Sully. 5 people. 5. She wrote that number in her notebook. Emmett noticed her writing it down, and he didn't say anything. And later he would think back to that moment many times. Ashgrove Health Partners' central compounding facility stood in the Fields Point Industrial District, a single-story building 90 meters long, gray walls, no sign, only a street number. The federal team arrived at exactly 4 o'clock, 11 people in 2 vehicles. The night shift manager came to open the door within 3 minutes and didn't look surprised at all, and that was the first detail that made the team leader feel that something was wrong. The lights were on inside. Everything was clean. The floor had just been mopped. The cold storage area was empty. Not empty in the way something had been stripped in a hurry. Empty in the way something had been cleared carefully. Shelves arranged neatly, labels still in place, temperature still maintained, and the inventory ledger lying open on the desk with the final entry written clearly in ink. The entire inventory had been transferred out at 7 o'clock the previous evening. There was complete paperwork. There was an internal transfer order signed by the Director of Operations, with the stated reason being a restructuring of warehouse logistics in preparation for the corporate transfer. There was a vehicle list, license plates, driver's names. Everything was legal. Everything followed procedure, and there was nothing to seize. The night shift manager said he only knew that an order had come through the previous afternoon to move the inventory, that he had signed for it, and that no one had told him why, and he said it with the face of a man telling the truth. The federal team stayed for 4 hours. They sealed the servers, seized the surveillance hard drives, and collected the records. The cameras had been reformatted at 7:15 the previous evening. Vance called Emmett at 8:12 that morning. He listened to her for 40 seconds without interrupting. When she finished, he asked only one question. 7 o'clock last night. 7 o'clock last night, Vance said. He ran the time through his head. She had called him at 7:15. "They started moving everything before you called me," he said. "Yes, 15 minutes apart." Her voice didn't change at all, which means the leak didn't happen after that call. It happened before. "From the moment the judge signed the warrant until the moment I called you, there were 40 minutes. Who knew during those 40 minutes? Me, my 2 analysts, and the judge's office." She paused. "You think I haven't already considered that?" "I don't think anything. Mr. Kavanaugh, I'm going to tell you this directly once, and I won't say it again." Vance's voice was very flat. Flat in the way of someone who had spent the entire night sitting in her office. "If the leak came from my side, I'll find it within 2 days. I have access logs. I have the authority to demand financial statements, and I have 3 people to investigate. And my side, if it came from your side, you have 2 hours." She hung up. Emmett stood in the kitchen of the Bellamy Street house with the phone in his hand for about 10 seconds. Then he called Sully. "Where are you?" "At the warehouse, looking over the shipping documents." "Come back here." Faye was sitting at the dining table with her notebook. She had heard most of the call and didn't ask anything. She only waited. "The warehouse was empty," Emmett said. "What time did they move everything?" 7 o'clock last night." She picked up her pen, wrote the time in the notebook, then looked up. "What time did the judge sign the warrant?" 7 o'clock. "Then it's 15 minutes. She set the pen down. The leak didn't come from the phone call. It came from wherever the warrant was signed, or from one of the 5 people who knew beforehand. "Miss." Vance said exactly the same thing. Faye looked down at the page. Emmett saw her doing the same thing she had done for 3 years with numbers that didn't match in medical records. She was rearranging the order. "Mr. Kavanaugh," she said. "What? Have you considered that it could be coming from your side?" He didn't answer immediately. In 6 years of running the South Harbor, Emmett Kavanaugh had dealt 3 times with people inside his own organization selling information to outsiders. All 3 times, he had known before he had evidence, because his father had taught him that an organization wasn't destroyed from the outside. It was destroyed through the softest place within. What bothered him now wasn't that the possibility existed. What bothered him was that he hadn't thought of it before Faye asked. "Yes," he said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going back to the warehouse." She nodded and lowered her eyes to the notebook, then added something he hadn't expected. "Don't ask anyone about last night." He stopped at the door. "Why?" "Because whoever is selling information has already prepared an answer to that question." She didn't look up. "Ask them something else. Something small. Something they don't think matters, so they won't have had time to invent an answer." Emmett stood in the doorway looking at her. "Where did you learn that?" Faye turned to a fresh page. 3 years sitting at a night shift intake desk," she said. "People lie about their symptoms all the time. You never ask them directly whether they've been drinking. You ask what time they ate dinner." Emmett didn't open any investigation. He didn't have anyone followed, didn't check anyone's phone, and didn't ask a single question about Wednesday night. He invited Rory Doyle to dinner. Rory was 26, the son of his mother's younger sister, and he had worked for the organization since he was 19. He handled logistics, vehicles, shifts, gate schedules, who went where and at what time. He was good at it, and he had been doing it for 4 years, and in those 4 years Emmett had never had to remind him twice about anything. They ate at an Italian restaurant on Atwell Street, at a table in the corner, at 6 o'clock Friday evening. Rory talked through the entire meal. He talked about replacing the tires on 2 trucks, about a driver who had called in sick, about the price of fuel. He talked the way people talk when everything is normal. When the coffee came, Emmett asked, "Who was on gate 2 Wednesday night?" Rory didn't hesitate. That was the part Emmett would remember most afterward. "Petey Marsh," he said. 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning. Emmett nodded and finished his coffee. Petey Marsh had quit on the 17th of the previous month. His back was bad. He had asked to leave, and Rory himself had prepared the paperwork for his final pay. The man on gate 2 Wednesday night had been a young man named Dev Callahan, and Emmett knew because he had personally gone to ask Dev Callahan at 4 o'clock that afternoon, before going to dinner. He let it go. He paid for the meal, asked Rory about his mother, listened when Rory said she was the same as always, then told him to come to the warehouse the next morning. That night, Emmett sat in the kitchen of the Bellamy Street house until 2 o'clock in the morning. Faye came out for water and found him sitting there in the dark. "You found him," she said. "Yeah." She didn't ask who. She poured herself some water, leaned against the edge of the kitchen counter, and said one thing. "What are you going to do with him?" Emmett didn't answer. Faye looked at him for a moment, then went back to her room. At 9 o'clock Saturday morning, there were 7 people in the back office of the Kestrel Point warehouse. Rory Doyle stood in the middle of the room. Sully stood by the door. No one said anything for about 20 seconds. Emmett sat on the edge of the desk. "Petey Marsh left on the 17th of last month," he said. "You did his paperwork." Rory said nothing. The color drained from his face very quickly. "I didn't ask you about Wednesday night," Emmett said. "I asked you something small, and you answered too fast, with a name you had prepared some time before, because you were afraid the day would come when I asked." Rory sat down in a chair. No one had told him to sit. He talked for about 3 minutes. Someone had approached him 5 weeks earlier. Not one of Holloway's people, but a middleman, a softly spoken attorney carrying a sheet of paper. There was no threat written on it, only the name Nora Doyle, 61 years old, his mother, along with her dialysis schedule 3 times a week at the dialysis center inside Ashgrove Health Partners' Warwick facility, clearly listing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, morning shift. The attorney said Mrs. Doyle was receiving excellent care and that they hoped it would continue. Then he asked Rory whether he would like to know anything more about his employer's schedule. "I didn't know what it was about," Rory said. "I swear. I only gave them times. I didn't know what was inside that warehouse. I thought it was harbor cargo." "Did you ask?" Emmett said. Rory didn't answer. "You've handled logistics for me for 4 years," Emmett said. "You know the rules of this house. We don't touch hospitals. We don't touch schools. We don't touch churches. You've known that rule since you were 19, and you never once asked why." "I know why," Rory said very softly. No one in the room moved. Sully looked at Emmett. The other 6 men looked at Emmett. It was the moment when everyone in the room knew what usually happened next, and not one of them doubted that it would happen. Emmett looked at Rory Doyle for a long time, 20 seconds, then 30. "What days does your mother have dialysis?" he asked. Rory looked up. "Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This Monday morning, she doesn't go back there." Rory didn't understand. Tonight you take your mother out of the city, Emmett said. Anywhere you want, more than 2 states away. Sully will give you the name of a dialysis center in Springfield before 4 o'clock this afternoon. I'll pay every dollar of her treatment, for as long as she needs it. Rory started to say something. I'm not finished. Emmett rose from the edge of the desk. She's my mother's younger sister. What I'm doing for her, not for you. Rory went silent. Take her out tonight, Emmett said, and don't ever let me see you again. Rory Doyle walked out of the room at 9:22 on Saturday morning, and no one in the organization ever saw him in Providence again. When the room was empty, Sully closed the door. How are you going to explain that to the boys out there? He said. They just watched a man sell information to outsiders and walk out on both feet. I'm not going to explain it. You should. This story is going to be told. Emmett stood looking out over the concrete yard behind the warehouse, where 2 trucks were parked, where he had stood almost every day for the past 6 years. Sully. Yeah, 3 years ago. I sat in that plastic chair beside bed 12 on the 4th floor. He didn't turn around. If someone had walked in then with a piece of paper and asked me whether I wanted to know something more, what do you think I would have said? Sully didn't answer. I had someone lying in that man's hospital too, Emmett said. Deborah Vance called at 6 o'clock Sunday evening with an update, and the update was brief. The servers seized at Fields Point contained operational data only from April of that year onward. Everything older had been transferred to external storage during a system upgrade in March, all according to procedure, with documentation and signatures. That external storage location was part of the assets currently being sold. The surveillance footage had been reformatted. It couldn't be recovered. The paper inventory ledgers went only through the 7th. I still have the 3 outbound shipments made after the destruction date, Vance said. Those are real, and no one can erase them because they exist in the pharmaceutical regulator's public data. But 3 outbound shipments prove 1 batch of medication. They don't prove 71 people. 40, Emmett said. We have 40 complete records. 40 records collected by a witness who currently has a warrant out for her arrest, Vance said. Mr. Kavanagh, I'm not saying they're worthless. I'm saying the other side will attack exactly that point, and they'll attack it hard. She said there were 8 days left before the 18th. Then she hung up. Emmett stood in the kitchen for a while, then walked into the front room. Faye was sitting at the dining table. In front of her lay the black notebook and 3 loose sheets of paper, and on those 3 sheets were 3 handwritten lists, each 31 lines long. How many times have you written them out? He asked. Today makes 9. Do they match? 28 lines match all 9 times. She pushed 1 sheet toward him. 3 don't. He looked down. 3 lines had been marked in pencil along the margin. What doesn't match? 1 name I remember as Delgado, but once I wrote Delgado. 1 admission date I remember as February 11th, but 3 times I wrote February 12th. She paused. The 3rd one, I only remember the first name. I can't remember the last name. Then leave those 3 out. I can't. Why not? Faye looked up. Because they're 3 human beings. Emmett said nothing. She lowered her eyes, closed the notebook, and rested both hands on its cover the way he had seen her do at Ruth Vandermeer's clinic. Mr. Kavanagh, I'm going to tell you something. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. My sister's name was Annie Corbin, she said. She got sick when she was 18. She died when she was 20. The time between those 2 points was 311 days in the hospital. She said the number without the slightest hesitation. My father died on a fishing boat when I was 14. My mother died 2 years later. From the time I was 16, it was just the 2 of us in that house. Her voice remained even. I went to nursing school because it was a 2-year program, and I could get a job immediately afterward. Not because I had some calling, because it was the shortest road to a paycheck. Emmett sat quietly. By the time Annie was admitted to Ash Grove Memorial, I'd already been working there for a year and a half. I wasn't assigned to care for her. That was against policy. Family members couldn't provide direct care, but I was inside that building 12 hours a day, and after my shift I would go upstairs and sit with her. She paused for a beat. I started noticing things in the 4th month. Noticing what? The numbers, she said. After every infusion cycle, the blood values are supposed to respond in a certain direction. They don't always improve, but there has to be some response. Annie's barely changed at all. It was as though she hadn't been given anything. Emmett didn't ask another question. He let her speak. I asked her attending physician. He said some patients responded poorly, that it was normal, that as many as 20% of patients could be like that. I went back and checked the medical literature. He was right. That number was real. She looked down at her hands. There were nights when I was the one who went to the refrigerator, took out her infusion bag, and carried it upstairs because the nurse on duty was busy. I held it in my hands. I looked at the label. I had already thought about it. Do you understand? I had already considered that possibility. She raised her eyes. I held that bag in my hands, and I knew something wasn't right, and I still hung it. The room was very quiet. 311 days, she said. I hung it every time. Why? Because I thought I was wrong. Her voice broke only once, on that single word, then immediately returned to what it had been. I was only 23. I had graduated from a 2-year program at a community college. Around me were specialists, department heads, a hospital with 300 employees, and a professional review board. She looked directly at him. I thought an entire hospital couldn't be wrong, but I could. Emmett Kavanagh had sat in many rooms with many people saying things that were difficult to say. In 6 years, he had learned that most of those conversations required a long answer, or a promise, or money. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, the woman who had spent 3 years writing down the names of 71 strangers, and he understood that she wasn't looking for comfort at all. She was waiting for a verdict. You weren't wrong, he said. Faye didn't answer. She lowered her eyes, opened the notebook, and began writing the list for the 10th time. On Monday morning, Deborah Vance asked for something no one in the group had thought of. She ordered a search of the land records. Her reasoning was simple. A healthcare corporation preparing to sell itself to a foreign investment fund would spend the years beforehand making its asset portfolio look clean and orderly. She wanted to know what Ashgrove Health Partners had bought, where, and when. The results came back at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Over the previous 4.5 years, Ashgrove had purchased or entered into long-term leases on 11 parcels of land in Rhode Island. 9 were adjacent to existing hospitals. 1 was in Cranston and was being used as a parking lot. The 11th was an unfinished file. Vance called Emmett at 3:10. Mr. Kavanagh, I need to ask you one question, and I need an exact answer. Your warehouse at Kestrel Point. Whose name is that property in? He didn't have to think. My mother's. There was silence on the other end for about 3 seconds. She died 3 years ago, Vance said. Yes. You never transferred the title. No. Do you know the acreage? 4 hectares, he said. 3 warehouses, a concrete yard, and an office block. How long have you been there? 6 years. Before that, my father. Vance said she would call him back within an hour. She called again 40 minutes later and said she wanted to meet in person. 7 o'clock that evening. 4th floor of the federal building. Back entrance. Faye went with him. Ruth Vandermeer objected, and for the 3rd time, no one listened to her. Vance placed 3 folders on the desk. Ashgrove Health Partners currently distributes pharmaceuticals to 4 facilities from a single location at Fields Point, she said. That facility is leased. The lease expires this year, and it sits deep inside an industrial district with no direct port access and no container yard. 4 years ago, they began planning a regional distribution center to replace it. She opened the first folder. This is the zoning plan submitted to the city 4 years and 2 months ago. The proposed site is circled in red. Emmett looked down. He recognized the shape before he even read the street name. He had seen it on maps, on insurance papers, on electric bills, for 6 years. Kestrel Point, Vance said. 4 hectares, adjacent to Port Access Road 3, with 3 existing warehouses, a load-bearing concrete yard, and 800 meters from the customs station. No one said anything. They filed for a zoning adjustment before they owned the land, she said. That isn't unusual. People do that when they assume acquiring the property will be a formality. She opened the second folder. These are 3 purchase offers sent to the owner. 3 letters. 3 offers. The same signature format at the bottom, signed by Ashgrove's Director of Property Development. The first was dated March 11th, 3.5 years earlier. The offer was $2,800,000. The second was dated June 29th, $3,400,000. The third was dated September 14th, $4,100,000, with a line stating that this was the final offer and that the sender hoped to receive a response within 30 days. Emmett stared at the date on the 3rd letter for a long time. How did she answer? He asked. Vance opened the 3rd folder. The first 2 times, her secretary replied with 1 sentence, saying the owner had no interest in transferring the property. She slid the last sheet toward him. The 3rd time, she wrote the response herself. It was a copy. The handwriting was large and slanted, written in ink. Emmett recognized it immediately. There were only 3 lines on the page. She thanked them for the offer. She said the property had been the place where her family had done business for 22 years and wasn't something she intended to sell. She said she hoped they wouldn't send any more letters. At the bottom, she signed her name and wrote the date, September 20th. She was admitted to the hospital on November 19th, Faye said. Everyone in the room turned toward her. 59 days after this letter, she said. Emmett set the paper down on the desk. He set it down very carefully, with both hands, as though he were placing something fragile. Miss Vance, he said. Yes. Tell me what you're thinking. Say it plainly. Deborah Vance was a woman who, for 19 years, hadn't said anything she couldn't prove. She remained silent for quite a while before answering. I'm thinking that of those 71 names, 70 were consequences, she said. Someone diluted medication to sell the difference. And those sick people died sooner because they happened to be inside that system. They weren't targets. They were the cost. And number 71? I can't say yet, Vance said, but I can tell you this. On the entire list, Mrs. Kavanagh is the only person who had a property relationship with Ashgrove Health Partners before she was admitted, and she is the only person whose absence gave this corporation a specific, measurable benefit. If she died, the land came to me, Emmett said. The land passed to the heir. And from a corporation's perspective, an heir is often easier to negotiate with than the person who held that property for 22 years. She closed the folder. They miscalculated there. Faye spoke very softly. Name number 19, she said. Emmett turned toward her. I arranged the list by admission date, she said. She was number 19 out of 71. I always thought she was the 19th person who got caught in it. She looked down at her hands. She didn't get caught in it. She was put there. Emmett said nothing else for the entire drive home. For the past 3 years, he had gotten up at 6 o'clock every morning and driven to Kestrel Point. He had parked in the concrete yard behind Warehouse 2. From there, he had walked to the office block, about 40 steps, every day, 6 days a week. He had signed papers in that room, argued in that room, sat alone in that room on the night after the funeral. He had walked across that ground every day for 3 years. He had never once asked why it belonged to him. At 4 o'clock Tuesday morning, Emmett called Sully and told him to open the organization's shipping records archive. He needed to know where the cargo that had left Fields Point at 7 o'clock Wednesday evening had gone. 3 trucks, 3 license plates, 3 drivers' names. All of it was already in the documents the federal agents had seized. But there was one thing in Providence that the federal government didn't have, and Emmett Kavanagh did. Anything transported by road out of this city to be loaded onto a ship had to pass through one of 4 gates. And for the past 6 years he had paid to know who passed through which gate, and at what time. It took him 2 hours and 10 minutes. At 6:10 that morning, he had the entire route. The 3 trucks had left Fields Point at 7 o'clock in the evening, driven directly to a rented cold storage warehouse in Seekonk, across the Massachusetts state line, unloaded at 9:20, and the cargo was still there. He called Vance at 7 o'clock that morning and told her. She was silent longer than he expected. Where did you get this information? From my ledger. What ledger? The ledger that records who passes through which gate, he said. It has the date, time, license plate, and the name of the person on duty. Mr. Kavanagh. There was no relief at all in her voice. I can't use that. Why not? It's accurate. Accuracy isn't the standard. Admissibility is. She slowed down, in the manner of someone who had explained this many times over 19 years. That document was created by an organization with no legal standing, for unlawful purposes, kept in an uncontrolled location, by people who were never under oath. There's no chain of custody. There's no one who can take responsibility for its integrity. It still points to exactly where the cargo is, and defense counsel will need about 3 minutes to get it excluded from the record. Then they'll tell the jury that this entire case was built on the books of a criminal organization operating out of the South Harbor. She paused. Do you understand what that would mean for Miss Corbin? He did. Then what do I have to do to make it usable? You submit it, Vance said. Officially, under oath, with the identity of the person submitting it, and a statement explaining where the document came from. Meaning I testify to who I am. Meaning you testify to who you are, what you do, and how you obtained that information. She didn't lower her voice or soften the words. I'm not going to lie to you. That will be used against you. This office has an open file on you, and I won't close it. He hung up and sat motionless for 10 minutes. Then he drove back to the Bellamy Street house, went down to the basement, and opened the safe set into the wall behind a storage rack. There were 3 things inside: property papers, a watch, and a thick, worn brown leather ledger with a rotting tie strap. His father, Cormac Kavanagh, had died 7 years earlier. For 20 years, he had written everything down by hand because he didn't trust computers and didn't trust the people who worked for him either. After the funeral, Emmett had taken the ledger from his father's desk and locked it in the safe. And in 7 years, he had opened it only 3 times, each time to find a name, and each time he had closed it again immediately. That morning he sat at the kitchen table and began reading from the first page. He read for 7 hours. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Faye came out to get water and found him still sitting there with the ledger open near the middle, both hands resting on either side of it without touching it. "What did you find?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "Starting 11 years ago," he said. "There's an entry that repeats every quarter." She sat down. "My father recorded every payment using 3-letter abbreviations. Who paid, how much, and what for?" He turned the ledger toward her. "This line says medical cargo, refrigerated container, through gate 3. Don't open, don't inspect." Faye looked down at the handwriting. "How many times?" "Once every quarter for the first 7 years. Then it increased to once a month." "When did it increase?" He turned 3 pages. 4.5 years ago, he said. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "My father didn't know what was inside," Emmett said. "I knew him. He didn't touch medication, didn't touch drugs, and he threw 2 men out over that. He thought it was medical equipment being moved to avoid taxes." "Did he ask?" Emmett was silent. "No," he said. He closed the ledger. "For the past 6 years, I haven't asked either." That line kept running. "It's on the list of recurring payments I approve every month, and I signed it the same way I signed everything else." He looked at her. "That man's operation ran for 11 years in this city, not because he was good at it. It ran because his cargo went through my family's gate, and no one opened it to see what was inside." Faye didn't offer a single word of comfort. She only sat there. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. "You already know. I'm asking what you think." She looked at him for a long time. "I think 3 years ago I held an infusion bag in my hands and knew something wasn't right, and I still hung it," she said. "I lived with that for 311 days, and I'll live with it until I die. I'm not advising you to do anything, Mr. Kavanaugh. I'm only telling you that I know what it feels like to stand where you're standing." Emmett Kavanaugh submitted his father's ledger to the office of the Deputy United States Attorney at 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, on the 15th, 3 days before the deadline. He signed a sworn statement identifying the source of the document. He gave his name, stated his role at the South Harbor, and testified that for 6 years he had approved the payments recorded in the ledger without ever inspecting the contents of the cargo. He signed in front of 2 prosecutors and a court clerk. At 7 o'clock that evening, in the car on the way back, Sully drove without saying anything for 4 kilometers. Then he spoke. "Do you understand what you just did?" "I do," Emmett said. Cormac Kavanaugh's ledger did exactly one thing, and it did that one thing in 14 hours. It didn't prove who had diluted the medication. It only proved that for 11 years, medical cargo in refrigerated containers had passed through Gate 3 of the South Harbor without inspection, that the payments for allowing it through came from a single legal entity, and that the entity belonged to the ownership chain of Ashgrove Health Partners. For Deborah Vance, that was the piece she had been missing, because until then, everything she had remained within the boundaries of administrative misconduct. 142 vials of medication that should have been destroyed, 3 improper outbound shipments, a healthcare corporation with poor management. Good lawyers could turn all of that into a fine and a few people losing their jobs. The ledger moved it beyond those boundaries. Cargo moving through the harbor, undeclared, systematically, for 11 years, across state lines. That wasn't poor management anymore. That was an operation. Vance worked through Tuesday night and all day Wednesday with 6 people. She applied for 3 arrest warrants and 1 search warrant for the cold storage warehouse in Seekonk, and for the portion across the state line she did it through the federal court in Massachusetts, without going through anyone in Providence. The judge signed at 11 o'clock Wednesday night. This time no one was warned in advance. Emmett wasn't told. Faye wasn't told. At 11:10, Vance said exactly 1 sentence to him over the phone, that she would call him when it was over, and then she hung up. Cyrus Halloway was arrested at 7:20 Thursday morning, on the 17th, 1 day before the transaction was scheduled to close. Not at his house, in the executive parking lot behind Ashgrove headquarters on Dorrance Street. He had just stepped out of his car with a briefcase in his hand, and 4 federal agents had been waiting there since 6:40. He stopped. He looked at them for about 3 seconds. Then he set the briefcase on the ground, held both hands out in front of him, and said 1 sentence. "I want my attorney. Nothing else. No denial, no question about why, no one else's name." The agent read him his rights, and he nodded at exactly the places where a person was supposed to nod, like someone who had watched this scene many times in movies and knew what he was expected to do. The entire thing took less than 2 minutes. Lieutenant Ross Talbot was arrested at 7:50 at his home in Elmhurst. He answered the door in a shirt that wasn't fully buttoned. His wife stood on the staircase. He asked permission to go change his shirt, and they allowed him to. And when he came back downstairs, he was wearing a tie. 4 more people were arrested that day. Ashgrove's director of operations, 2 pharmacists responsible for the central compounding facility, and the director of property development, who had signed the 3 letters sent to Maeve Kavanagh. The cold storage warehouse in Seekonk was sealed at 9 o'clock. Inside were 3,200 vials of medication belonging to 14 different categories, most of them still bearing their original labels, and a portable compounding machine that no legitimate facility had any reason to keep inside a rented warehouse. Faye was on the 4th floor of the federal building when the first report went on the air. She had been there since 6 o'clock that morning, working with 2 prosecutors on her testimony, and when the television mounted in the corner of the room switched to live coverage, someone turned up the volume. On the screen was the parking lot behind Ashgrove headquarters. The television camera was filming from outside the fence, the image shaky and slightly distant. A silver-haired man in a gray suit could be seen walking toward a federal vehicle. Someone opened the door for him, and he bent down and got inside. His briefcase was still lying on the concrete. Someone picked it up and placed it inside an evidence bag. Faye stood up from the table and walked to the window. She stood there, looking outside. Not at the television. Beyond the glass was Kennedy Avenue at 7:30 in the morning. A bus stopped at the curb. People were going to work. A garbage truck backed into the alley beside the building across the street, beeping at regular intervals. Emmett arrived at 7:40. Sully stood in the hallway. No one said anything to her. She remained at the window for 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, the 2 prosecutors kept working at the table. The television kept playing, and someone made coffee in the corner of the room. No one congratulated anyone. Emmett noticed that, and he thought perhaps that was simply how these people worked, that they had arrested enough people to understand that arresting someone didn't mean the work was finished. Then Faye turned around. There was nothing on her face. No relief, no anger, no exhaustion. Emmett had watched this woman for 10 days, and he had learned to read her well enough to know that the absence of anything was the most dangerous thing of all. "Are you all right?" he asked. Faye looked toward the table, where the black notebook lay open beside the 3 handwritten sheets. "I still have 31 names I need to remember correctly," she said. Emmett Kavanagh was indicted on the 22nd, 7 days after Cyrus Halloway was arrested. 2 charges: operating an illegal business enterprise and conspiracy to launder money. The entire indictment was built on the statement he himself had signed in front of 2 prosecutors and a court clerk at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 15th. There were no other witnesses. There didn't need to be. Deborah Vance didn't apologize, and Emmett didn't ask her to. She had warned him beforehand that this would happen, and she did exactly what she said she would do. Halloway's case went to trial 7 months later. During those 7 months, Faye Corbin lived in the Bellamy Street house, received medical care at Ruth Vandermeer's clinic, and rewrote the list of 31 names once every day. The warrant for her arrest was withdrawn after 6 weeks, when the fabricated drug test was proven to have been entered into the system from an account belonging to Ross Talbot's department. But the line placed in her personnel file 3 years earlier remained there, because it had never been a criminal accusation, and no court could erase a line of writing that had never been brought before a court. That was exactly what Halloway's lawyers had been waiting for. 10 days before trial, they filed a 29-page motion. It had 2 parts. The first laid out Faye Corbin's disciplinary record at Ashgrove Memorial, including the termination notice stating that her contract had been ended for violating medication inventory procedures. The second went directly after the 31 names that weren't on the hard drive, and argued that a witness offering 31 identities entirely from memory, after 3 years, while carrying a personal conflict of interest, wasn't reliable enough for a jury to hear. Vance called Faye at 9 o'clock that night. She didn't soften it. "I've read their motion. It's very well written. There's a strong chance the judge will grant at least the second part. If he grants the first part too, you won't be allowed to testify." Faye sat at the dining table with the black notebook in front of her. Emmett stood in the kitchen doorway. Ruth Vandermeer sat across from her. "If I don't testify, what's left?" Faye asked. "The 3 outbound shipments are left. The warehouse in Seekonk is left. Mr. Kavanagh's ledger is left. That's enough to convict them for the trafficking operation." Vance paused. "It isn't enough to prove what happened to those 71 patients. For that, someone has to stand up and say it." Faye said nothing for about half a minute. Then she placed one hand on the notebook. "Then don't call me," she said. "Call the notebook." There was silence on the other end. "Say that again." "On the night of August 7th, I wrote 11 pages in this house," Faye said. "I wrote for 7 hours, from 9 o'clock at night until 4:10 in the morning. I signed my name, wrote the date, wrote the time. 3 people signed as witnesses, and were present the entire time I was writing. One of those 3 was Dr. Ruth Vandermeer. and the next morning she submitted a copy into the federal record with a signed certification. Vance remained silent. "Miss Vance, I wrote those 11 pages before anyone knew where this case would go. There was no search warrant yet. No one had been arrested. There was no agreement of any kind with your office. And you hadn't even agreed to meet with me a second time," she continued, slowly and clearly. "I had no reason to invent a name that night. I wrote them because I thought I was going to die before anyone was willing to listen." Deborah Vance was a woman who had spent 19 years keeping emotion out of her voice while she worked. "Miss Corbin," she said, "I need the original in my hands before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." What happened at trial was something no defense attorney had prepared for. They had won the motion. The judge granted the second part and limited the scope of Faye Corbin's direct testimony. They had spent 3 weeks building a strategy to destroy the credibility of a living witness, and they had built it very well. Then the prosecution didn't call that witness to the stand. Vance introduced the 11 handwritten pages as an independent document created before any official investigation existed, witnessed by 3 people, with a copy that had been in the federal record since the morning of August 8th. She called Ruth Vandermeer to the stand to verify the circumstances under which the document had been written. She called a handwriting expert. She called 2 investigators who had compared every line in those 11 pages with the 40 records recovered from the hard drive, and both testified that there wasn't a single contradiction. Of the remaining 31 names, 19 were independently confirmed through state death records. 9 were confirmed through family testimony. 3 couldn't be confirmed, and Vance voluntarily removed them from the indictment. The defense had no one to cross-examine. You can't question a sheet of paper about its motives. Faye Corbin sat in the back row through all 11 days of the trial, and never once stepped onto the witness stand. Cyrus Halloway was sentenced to 29 years in federal prison, with no eligibility for early release. Ross Talbot received 8 years. The 3 pharmacists in charge received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years depending on the extent of their cooperation. The director of operations received 6 years. Ashgrove Health Partners was dissolved under an accompanying civil judgment. The sale to the Foreign Investment Fund was canceled, and the 4 hospitals were transferred to public management under state supervision. All 71 families received formal written notification within the next 5 months. Their medical records were reviewed one by one. On the line listing cause of death, an additional notation was entered bearing the official seal of the State Health Authority. Among them was the record of Maeve Kavanaugh, 61 years old, and the record of Annie Corbin, 20 years old. Emmett Kavanaugh pleaded guilty to both charges and didn't ask for leniency based on the fact that he had been the one to submit the evidence. His attorney fought him on that for 4 months and eventually had to accept it. The sentence was 5 years and 6 months. The night before he was due to report, Faye came to see him. They sat in the kitchen of the Bellamy Street house. Sully had already gone home. Only the 2 of them remained. "You didn't have to submit that statement," she said. "Miss Vance already had the warehouse in Seekonk. She already had the 3 outbound shipments. You could have given her your father's ledger another way. No name, no signature. Maybe. Then why?" Emmett looked down at his hands for a while. "Because if I stayed clean on paper by lying," he said, "then your statement would become dirty with mine. People would ask where that evidence came from, who provided it, and why the person who handed it over was afraid to sign his name. Then all 11 pages you wrote would become suspicious too." He looked up. "I wasn't going to let that happen." 4 years later, in South Providence, on a street corner with a laundromat and a small church, there was a free community clinic open 5 days a week. On the wooden sign hanging above the door were 2 names. No last names, only 2 first names painted in lowercase white letters. Faye Corbin was 31 years old. She worked there 4 days a week, and on the 5th day she taught. The class lasted 2 hours, once a month, and it was for nurses. There was no degree, no certificate, no tuition. She taught 3 things: how to document something so that another person could read it 3 years later and still understand it, how to recognize when a number didn't match, and how to check whether it truly didn't match, or whether you were simply tired, and how to report something through a channel that wasn't controlled by the person you were reporting. 9 people came to the first class. By the 6th, there were 40. She didn't tell her own story in class. She never had. Some people knew, some didn't, and she didn't think it mattered. She stood at the front of the room with a stack of blank paper and a pen, and told them that the most valuable thing a nurse possessed wasn't knowledge, but the habit of writing down what they saw, even when they thought they might be seeing it wrong. Behind the clinic was a concrete yard with 2 basketball hoops that the Neighborhood Parents Association had put up the previous summer. Every Saturday afternoon, children came out there to play. They divided teams with rock, paper, scissors, argued over the score, shouted one another's names loud enough to fill the whole corner, and the sound of the ball bouncing on concrete carried through the classroom windows with the steadiness of a pulse. In the middle of a lesson, Faye stopped. She turned toward the window for about 3 seconds, smiled, then turned back to the board and continued teaching. At the end of the class, when almost everyone had gone, a man stood at the back of the room. He was about 37, tall, with black hair already touched with gray at both temples, wearing a dark wool coat. In his hands were 2 paper cups of coffee. He didn't come inside. He stood there and waited until the final student had finished asking the final question. They sat on the steps in front of the clinic. It was an October afternoon, not quite cold yet. "When did you get back?" she asked. "Tuesday. Does Sully know?" "He picked me up." She took a sip of coffee. It wasn't very good, but she didn't say anything. "I read about this clinic in prison," he said. "A local newspaper wrote about it last year. That article got 2 details wrong." "I know. I still clipped it out and kept it." They sat quietly for a while. Somewhere up the street, someone had music playing in a car. "Mr. Kavanagh," she said. "Yeah, that night on the service road. You could have settled everything in one night. You had people. You had names. You had everything you needed. You were going to do it. I know you were. I was. Why didn't you?" Emmett looked toward the concrete yard behind the clinic, where the sound of the basketball was still rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "Because if I had," he said, "no one would ever have known Annie's name. There was no miracle in this story. No one came back to life. No one received compensation equal to what had been taken from them. And 71 families still had to keep living with an emptiness no sentence could ever fill. But one truth was recorded exactly as it had happened, and that wasn't a small thing. A person's true strength doesn't lie in the ability to destroy. It lies in choosing the harder road, when the easier one is already open in front of them. The most invisible person in a room is often the one who sees most clearly, because no one notices them, and so they have time to observe. Justice almost always comes late. It speaks through paperwork, through dry official seals, and it can't give back anyone we have lost. But it is still worth waiting for, and still worth having someone spend an entire life building. And sometimes, what saves a person isn't power or money. Sometimes it is simply that someone is willing to stop a car at 3 o'clock in the morning and ask one question: who can I call to help you? If Faye and Emmett's story touched you in some way, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video, because every day we bring you new stories about courage and ordinary people who do extraordinary things. How did today's story make you feel? And if you have ever met someone who kept searching for the truth, even when no one believed them, please leave a few words in the comments, because we truly want to hear the deepest feelings in your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, peace, and serenity every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.